Tommy Bennett was 8 years old the first time he saw Johnny Carson's face, not through his eyes, which had never worked, through his hands, through touch, the way blind people see everything that matters. Johnny sat perfectly still in his dressing room while Tommy's small hands moved carefully across his face, feeling the shape of Johnny's nose, the texture of his skin, the curve of his smile. Tommy was memorizing, building a picture that wasn't visual but was just as real. Johnny didn't speak. Didn't want to break the moment, just let this 8-year-old boy who'd listened to his voice for 2 years finally meet the face behind it. After 3 minutes that felt like forever, Tommy stepped back, smiled, and said, "Now I know what you look like, Mr. Carson." Johnny felt tears in his eyes, because most people take seeing for granted. We look at faces without thinking, without appreciating that for someone like Tommy, seeing someone is an act of intimacy, of trust, of time. Tommy Bennett had been blind since birth. For 8 years, he'd experienced the world without vision, and one of his greatest joys was listening to The Tonight Show on his transistor radio every night. Johnny's voice was familiar, comforting, real. But Tommy wanted more than just the voice. He wanted to see his friend. His mother Susan wrote a letter to Johnny explaining, and Johnny said yes. Not just to meet Tommy, to let Tommy touch his face, to give Tommy the gift of seeing him the only way Tommy could. This is the story of that meeting, of what Johnny said afterward, and of how one moment of intimacy taught America something about what visibility really means. Tommy Bennett was born blind. Optic nerve damage before birth. The doctors said he'd never see anything. But Tommy's parents, Susan and Robert, raised him to experience the world fully, just differently. By age 8, Tommy navigated his house independently, read Braille fluently, and had friends at his school for blind children. But Tommy's favorite thing in the world was listening to The Tonight Show. It started when Tommy was 6. One night he heard Johnny Carson's voice from his parents' bedroom. Tommy was drawn to the sound. Susan found him listening outside their door and got him a transistor radio. From that night on, Tommy listened to The Tonight Show every evening. It became his ritual, his connection to a world he couldn't see but could absolutely feel. For 2 years, Johnny Carson was Tommy's companion. Tommy knew Johnny's voice better than most people knew faces. Could tell when Johnny was genuinely amused versus politely laughing. Tommy felt connected to this person he'd never met, but definitely knew. One evening in March 1989, Tommy said something that surprised his mother. "Mom, I want to see what Mr. Carson looks like." 3 weeks later, Susan's phone rang. A woman's voice. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Linda calling from The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson read your letter about Tommy." Susan's heart started pounding. "He did?" Linda's voice was warm. "Johnny was very moved by your letter, and he would love to meet Tommy. He'd like to give Tommy time to really get to know his face. Not on the show, privately, in his dressing room. Would that be possible?" Susan started crying. "Yes, oh my God, yes, thank you." Linda explained the details. They'd arrange a time when Johnny wasn't taping. Tommy could take as long as he needed. Johnny wanted this to be comfortable for Tommy, not rushed. When Susan told Tommy, he asked the same question 3 times. "Really? Mr. Carson really wants to meet me?" Susan hugged her son. "Yes, baby. Johnny Carson wants to meet you, and he wants you to see what he looks like." The week before the meeting, Tommy told everyone at school, "I'm going to meet Johnny Carson and see what he looks like." Some kids didn't understand. "But Tommy, you're blind." Tommy was patient. "I see with my hands, and I'm going to see Mr. Carson's face." April 15th, 1989. Susan and Robert drove Tommy to NBC Studios. Tommy was quiet, nervous. "I don't want Mr. Carson to think I'm weird," he whispered. Robert spoke from the driver's seat. "Tommy, Johnny invited you. There's no wrong way to do this." At the studio, Linda met them and walked them to Johnny's dressing room. Tommy held his mother's hand tightly. He could hear the activity around him, people talking, doors opening and closing, the energy of a television studio. Then Linda knocked on a door. "Johnny? Tommy Bennett is here." The door opened, and Johnny Carson's voice, the voice Tommy had listened to for 2 years, said something Tommy would remember forever. "Hello, Tommy, I'm so glad you're here." Tommy smiled. "Hi, Mr. Carson. I'm really happy to meet you." Johnny knelt down to Tommy's level. I hear you want to see what I look like, is that right? Tommy nodded. If that's okay. Johnny's voice was gentle. It's more than okay. I'm honored. Johnny stood up and led Tommy to a chair, helped him sit down. Then Johnny pulled up another chair and sat directly in front of Tommy, close enough that Tommy could reach him easily. Tommy, I'm going to sit very still. You take all the time you need. There's no rush. This is for you. Johnny reached out and took Tommy's hands, guided them to his face, placed Tommy's small palms on his cheeks, and then Johnny sat perfectly still. Tommy's hands began to move, slowly, carefully. This wasn't rushed or clinical. This was Tommy meeting his friend. His fingers traced the line of Johnny's jaw, felt the texture of his skin, moved up to his cheekbones, felt the curve of his face. Tommy's fingertips explored Johnny's nose, the bridge, the tip, the way it fit into his face. Then Tommy's hands moved to Johnny's forehead, felt the lines there, the texture, moved down to Johnny's eyebrows, felt their shape and thickness. Johnny watched Tommy's face while Tommy explored his, saw the concentration, the care, the way Tommy was building a picture that Johnny would never fully understand. Because Tommy's picture wasn't visual, it was tactile, dimensional, real in a way that photographs could never capture. Tommy's fingers moved to Johnny's mouth, felt the shape of his lips. Johnny smiled slightly and Tommy felt it. You're smiling, Tommy said. I am, Johnny confirmed. Because this is special. You're helping me understand something I'd never thought about before. Tommy continued, felt Johnny's ears, the shape and how they connected to his head, felt the back of Johnny's neck, the texture of his hair. Every detail mattered because this was how Tommy would remember, how he would see Johnny from now on. 3 minutes passed. To Johnny, it felt like both seconds and hours. Intimate in a way he'd never experienced, vulnerable, but also beautiful. This child was trusting him completely, and Johnny felt honored by that trust. Finally, Tommy's hands returned to Johnny's face, rested on his cheeks one more time, like saying goodbye. Or maybe hello. And Tommy stepped back, smiled the biggest smile Susan had seen in months. Now I know what you look like, Mr. Carson. Johnny felt tears in his eyes. His voice was thick when he spoke. And now I'll never forget what it feels like to be really seen. Thank you, Tommy. Susan was crying. Robert was crying. Linda, standing by the door, was crying, because they'd all just witnessed something profound. Most people see faces instantly, absorb them without thought. For Tommy, seeing Johnny's face had taken 3 minutes of careful attention, of time, of intimacy. And in doing so, Tommy had taught everyone in that room what seeing actually means. It's not about eyes. It's about attention, about care, about really knowing someone. After a few moments, Johnny asked Tommy if he'd like to sit in the Tonight Show guest chair, feel what the set was like. Tommy's face lit up. Really? Johnny took Tommy's hand and led him onto the empty Tonight Show set. Let Tommy touch his desk, feel the chair, stand where guests stood, experience the space he'd only heard through his radio. Then Johnny did something unexpected. He sat Tommy in the guest chair, sat at his desk, and said, Tommy, I'm going to interview you, just like I would any guest. For 5 minutes, on an empty set with no cameras rolling, Johnny Carson interviewed Tommy Bennett, asked him about school, about his favorite music, about what it's like to experience The Tonight Show through radio. And the visit ended. The Bennetts went home. And Tommy couldn't stop talking about it, about what Johnny's face felt like, about sitting in the guest chair, about how kind Johnny had been. He wasn't in a hurry, Mom, Tommy said. He let me take all the time I needed. He really wanted me to see him. That night, Tommy listened to The Tonight Show, like always. But it was different now, because he knew what Johnny looked like, could picture the face behind the voice. His friend wasn't just a voice anymore. He was real in the way that mattered most to Tommy. 2 weeks later, Johnny mentioned the meeting on his show, not dramatically, just casually during his monologue. I met a young man recently named Tommy who taught me something important. Tommy is blind, and he wanted to know what I looked like, not through someone's description. He wanted to actually see me, the way blind people see, through touch. So I let him. And it was one of the most meaningful experiences I've ever had. Because Tommy showed me that seeing someone isn't about eyes. It's about attention. It's about care. It's about taking time to really know someone. Most of us look at faces every day and don't really see them. Tommy can't look at faces, but he sees people more clearly than most of us ever will. The audience was quiet. This wasn't a joke. This was Johnny sharing something personal, something that had changed him. He continued, "We live in a world designed for sighted people, and we don't think much about what it's like for people who experience the world differently." Tommy reminded me that different doesn't mean less. It just means different. And sometimes different means more attentive, more careful, more real. Johnny paused. If you have kids, let them meet Tommy's story. Let them understand that blindness isn't tragedy. It's just a different way of experiencing the world. And sometimes that different way teaches the rest of us what we've been missing. The response to that monologue was overwhelming. Parents wrote letters thanking Johnny for normalizing disability. Teachers used the segment in their classrooms to talk about accessibility and inclusion. And advocacy groups for the blind applauded Johnny for presenting blindness not as limitation, but as difference. Johnny had used his platform not to inspire pity for Tommy, but to challenge how America thought about disability. Susan Bennett wrote Johnny a letter thanking him. "You gave Tommy more than a meeting. You gave him dignity. You treated him like a person, not a symbol. You sat still and let him see you without making it about you. That's a gift we'll never forget." Tommy Bennett grew up to become a teacher at a school for blind children. He tells his students about the time he met Johnny Carson, shows them that the world isn't built for blind people, but blind people can still fully experience it. Johnny Carson was the most famous person in America, Tommy tells his students, and he sat still for 3 minutes to let a blind kid see his face, not because he pitied me, but because he understood that seeing means different things to different people, and all ways of seeing matter. The lesson from Tommy and Johnny's meeting isn't complicated. It's about respect, about recognizing that everyone experiences the world differently, and that different isn't less. Tommy couldn't see Johnny through his eyes, but he saw him more intentionally than most people who watch The Tonight Show ever did, because Tommy had to pay attention, had to take time, had to really focus. And in doing so, Tommy saw not just Johnny's face, but his character, his kindness, his willingness to be vulnerable. That's what seeing really means, not the instant visual absorption we take for granted, but the careful, attentive knowing that comes from really paying attention. If this story changed how you think about visibility and accessibility, subscribe for more stories about human connection. Share this with someone who needs to understand that everyone experiences the world differently and all ways are valid. Comment below. How do you really see the people in your life? Because Tommy Bennett taught us something profound that day in Johnny's dressing room. Being seen isn't about being looked at. It's about being known. And sometimes, the people who can't see with their eyes see us more clearly than anyone else ever will.